Part 2. There are a lot of news this week. Let's go into Europe, right? Yes, France suddenly woke up, and even Le Pen said that Russia is wrong. And France, roughly speaking, will not stand aside. So now there are more fakes about France already planning to deploy troops in Odessa. But the important part is that something happened in France. A lot of people explain it with material interests and interests of the right wing in France. And by the way, these are the guys supporting Le Pen as well. That's her electorate. And obviously, military industry can make money on the current conflict, and they're supporting Le Pen. So she's now saying that Russia is wrong. If she would go against them, she would probably have political issues with supporters. Now, even if we just leave only these material reasons, I think France went berserk after Russian PMC Wagner actions in Sahel, in Africa, where out of 5 countries that were in pro-French Union, that were printing African franc, let's call it, due to actions of Russian Federation, France has lost its positions in 4 out of 5. That touched even those people in France. And French are a rather undervalued nation. They are sort of a victim of a black PR. There is a myth, a German myth, ex-Soviet Union myth, and Anglo-Saxon myth that French cannot fight, and they're weaklings. No, they're not. I would notice that there are several messages from the right wing, from Generality in France, who came out with a rather stern statement that if that trend will continue, they will take over and will clean the France up. And I want to say that France has a very serious school of geopolitics. It has a very robust military-industrial complex. They do the full cycle from rifle and bullets up to nukes. They have very strong military traditions, very strong general corps with their understanding of geopolitics, honor, and many other things. And they have the biggest land army in Europe, not counting Turkish. I don't know if Turkey should be counted in Europe or outside of Europe, but they are definitely a very serious army. I always have a sentiment for the victims of black PR, and when I see somebody being a victim of that, I usually dig deeper to see what happened. And French army is really a victim of black PR. And when people are saying that French do not know how to fight, I would remind you that in 1940, the battle coefficient of French army were higher than anyone else, even higher than Germans did. So roughly for one lost French tank or jet or airplane, they were destroying more tanks and airplanes of the enemy than any other army of the world. Red Army achieved only in 1944 the levels that French army displayed in 1940. In Algiers, in Africa, French army was using the most forward, the most advanced measures and capabilities. And they demonstrated military cunning and courage and were very flexible tactically. That was studied by all armies of the world. The theory of American mobile operations was born on the helicopters with a vertical embrace was born out of French actions in Algiers. So French definitely have what to be proud of. They have a very strong military tradition, and army and military industry have a very strong voice in their society. It's not a PR voice. It's not so loudly heard as some other statements, but they're definitely there, and we see some sort of renaissance in it. And what's interesting is that Macron, a world banker who grew up in the financial environment with all the left liberal aspects of it, is actively participating and actually leading that revival. And I think we can congratulate ourselves and everybody that he is now speaking almost in full voice with leaders of different fractions that support active actions to support Ukraine. And he's making statements that, well, we will take care of that. So maybe it is an attempt to grab the right-wing agenda before Europe Parliament elections. There are usually material reasons behind, but I also like to explore the goal or formal reasons. And why am I talking about French military-industrial complex in this regard? Because they have traditions and honor, and they're ready to fight for their interests. And having lost 4 countries, that definitely left a dent, left a mark, and they want to pay back. And if you also want to consider that France perhaps wants to take a place in global politics on the backdrop of the German failure to do that, and try to capture initiative within EU, and also bring up the threat by Trump that NATO may be left without the United States, then geopolitical reasons are also becoming rather valid, not just motivation of Macron or generals in France. So, vive la France, and I will be hitting everybody who will say that French are weaklings and they don't know what they're doing. They are helping us. They help us very diligently in a very versatile manner. Not many things are known in public, but I just want to outline here. They are, and they continue. And in this, I see the light of a very unusual thing. It's almost as wonderful, as miraculous as rising of Jesus in this regard. And as I was saying before, America has troubles, its society has issues, it's ill, but it's alive. But Europe, in my understanding, was sort of a museum under the open sky. And I pretty much neglected them in the future support for Europe. But I'm thinking some miracle is happening here. And I'm wondering if Lord is awakening Europe. This is not a real awakening, but this is the dawn of it. It's on the verge of it. And I don't know what happened there. I don't know if it's God's miracle or our posts here, our discussions about it, and some other experts also raising a very serious concern and voice. And I'm glad that we invested and acted to help Europe awaken. And maybe it's 0.5%, 0.1% of our effort that played role, but I'm glad that we were helping for that to happen, because I was breaking glasses and talking to everybody I could, and finally, starting with France, and not only, there is a military turn in Europe. They're seriously bringing up their military industry. And many people are saying, well, no, there are material reasons, and people are envious of France that was getting super profits from some of the deals. Even if so, I think also that, but Trump's threats that posted a perspective for Europe to stay one-on-one with Russian Federation, and motion of Sweden to join NATO, that's another element of that awakening, because Sweden is another country that has a full cycle of military production. There are less than 10 countries like that in the world. They do everything again from the rifles and pistols to Navy warships and missiles, and they are very seriously motivated and understand the threat that Russia can pose. And joining of Finland and Sweden to NATO finally locked the entrance to Baltic Sea for Russia, so annulled the 300 years of efforts by Russian Empire, and Russia will never leave it be. And I did talk about that back in June on the Baltic Forum, so I think I was sounding scary enough that they are awakening in this regard too. And I'll say one more thing, they'll be very positive. I'm concerned that perhaps it will be too drastically different from what we were talking about, but we're like, the indie song group, and we're singing what we're saying. I had several very serious conversations here in the United States, and I'm under impression, and first of all, and I do not like using, that's the inside information, that's rather discredited technology, but if it is true, I have to say it's true, so it's an insight. It appears that United States are generally not afraid of nuclear blackmail by Russia. Before that, there were some concerns about it, but now they're actually actively considering how to resist it. And they're ready to take action politically, economically, militarily to prevent that. They also stopped being afraid of the conventional warfare with Russia and possible blackmail, nuclear blackmail that may follow with it. That was, by the way, reflected in Putin's interview, where he said that Russia is ready to use it as a tool, the nuclear tool. And remember, we talked about the possible scenario of Caribbean Crisis II. So, yeah, that's the Cuban crisis. Russia is getting ready for that. But NATO is getting ready for that too. And they're ready to resist it, NATO and even Biden administration. And on one hand, that becomes a precursor telling that the probability of that crisis actually is rather high. But on the other hand, Ukrainians may stop looking at the West, thinking that the West will betray them. I don't want to seed false hopes, because thinking that there'll be no war, it will be done soon, very soon, there'll be no nuclear threat and Putin will be taken out. Not so. They still have a lot of concerns, and they have a long way to go to really resist Putin in this regard directly. But they finally went to growing military potential, which has not been for the previous 2 years of this war. And now they all insist on growing their military potential. And West still has technological advantage, if not absolute, but significant over Russian Federation. And if they will seriously start doing it, even without the socio-economic model change, which they should have if they want to really ramp it up, but even that should be rather enough to support Ukraine in the current capacity. And it also grows stronger inside and beefs up their readiness to resist threats like Russia produces now. And looking at Macron, with all his deficiencies, with all his leaning one side and leaning the other side, I remember the position of France in the group of the Normand format when we were discussing other negotiations here with Russia. He played a historic role, regardless of what was before or what will happen after. He is playing now a historic role, and it's his personal achievement that we should applaud. And it would be great if other leaders also took that position, or at least 2 or 3. But then there is a Prime Minister of Italy who is very concerned with the current situation and is a big friend of Ukraine as well. So it's great that Macron comes out and grabs the mic. In modern day history, it's a very important move, and he succeeded in doing that. So kudos to France. And Europe is now going to grow their military-industrial complex separately from the United States. This is one of the major news of that whole war, not of just Europe. And my current opinion is that they're not afraid of nuclear blackmail, and they're definitely not afraid of conventional war, and now they're growing their potential. Lord, thank you, Lord Almighty, thank you so much. Because your humble servant was working for quite a few months and having a lot of troubles trying to awaken them. All right, perhaps we should bring up some of your previous prognostications that you talked even last week about. Maybe number 1, a very strong phrase that you said, that Russia will post nuclear ultimatum and that NATO countries will surrender. I think now you're ready to review this frame and perhaps say that they will not surrender. Looking at what I'm seeing now, and I had a chance to, they are not going to surrender. Point of attention here, they will go for a compromise. Obviously, nobody will make the nuclear war happen, but this will be the compromise of force, not of weakness. At least that's what I'm thinking now. Because the compromise I was foretelling before, they were the compromise from weakness, when you're not ready to fight, and will pay with Ukraine. Maybe not fully, but will make them do certain things. But the compromise by force, that, of course, nobody wants to fight a nuclear war, but it's very drastically different from the compromise based on weakness. And they also bring this model over Ukraine, and they're saying that the main victory that we can achieve in Ukraine is not a full total victory over Russia, but it would be great to finish the war with the position of power. And this is a positive news. This doesn't fit our helter-skelter Ukrainian propaganda that's been peddled here. We talked about that till the borders of 91. It doesn't fit there. We will not get to those borders right now. They should remain our political goal, but compromise with force is a very different position than compromise from the position of weakness. I hope everybody understands that. So that's number 1. All right, let's go in a little more detail to that framework. I remember at the beginning of this war, you had some ideations about how would the West and NATO behave in it, the ones that have nukes, and France is one of these countries. And moreover, I think France is probably the only country in Europe that can use nukes regardless of anybody else, without considering anybody else. Right, French president makes this decision unilaterally. He doesn't have to take advice or get a nod from anybody else. So this is a good story, right? All right, also, while we are running the stream, there is another piece of news that French troops are actually sending their infantry to Ukraine. France Press is making a publication. They mention a second foreign legion. I don't know if that's what you're talking about. Oh yeah, that's probably a French legion detachment, and it's a very interesting one. They have very peculiar capabilities. They have military divers, they have paratroopers, and by the way, there are a lot of Ukrainians serving in this one. So I wanted to ask, back then we said that if Russian Federation is using any kind of nuclear munition, then United States probably take out the whole Black Sea Fleet. No, not the Black Sea Fleet. I think the last statement they made is that if they use it, then the United States would destroy by conventional means the group that used these weapons. So if Russian aerial division used nukes, then Americans destroy them with conventional weapons. But now information is different. All these threats of nuclear blackmail were heard in Europe, and they don't want to give up and surrender. They have a lot of drawbacks, but they found it within themselves to say, no, we're not going for that. And I'm saying that Macron is playing a historical role here, not him alone, but he definitely is the leader on the tribune, making very fiery speeches. So he's saying that they're ready to a wider response. Let's not go into details, but let's just say it's a wider response. In your view, on practice, how could it be? And there is a big framework in regards to the negotiations. We probably will talk about that separately. Putin is somewhat begging for these negotiations, expressing his readiness to do that. But perhaps he fails to agree with President Zelensky for various reasons that we can discuss. I think that's important. And then suddenly, we don't know the real situation with the Russian economy, but there are some signals that everything that they're drawing about fifth economy of the world, about some purchasing power parity, these are all inflated numbers, and it's not true. The real situation with their economy is much more pathetic, and they're just pretending their wishes to be the reality. And that is also pressing Putin to take certain extraordinary measures in order to prolong this war, to fight till autumn, to continue advancing. He would not want to make these steps. He would not want to create more strain in Russian society, so he might use tactical nuke. What do you think France will do in this regard? Do you want to say France or NATO at large? Let's take France, for example. And okay, then whom did he use the nuke, for example? On Ukraine. All right, so if Putin uses it on Ukraine, then I think the answer will be a destruction of the whole group of Russian troops that are on the territory of Ukraine with conventional methods. And then again, depends upon the scenario, just like General Hodges said, depends where it was used. If they used it in some blank space where there is nobody, then they'll destroy the detachment that used this nuke. If they use it on the city or on people, then I think NATO will escalate and join in the conventional warfare. For example, indeed, yeah, they can sink the remnants of the Black Sea Fleet, but they will not be quiet and they will not be just looking at it from a side. So the news for today, yes, they made the decision that they will resist by force if needed, and the signs to support that are growing. And now let's go back to Putin. Do you think he is ready for nuclear war or increase the nuclear blackmail? And I think we're in a stage where they're betting. It's a poker game now, and it means that Caribbean crisis or Cuban Missile Crisis has already started, version 2. The initial one also didn't unfold in terms of days. It was going to that moment for about a year. And me and you here, we've been predicting that this likely will happen. Good thing that Europe and NATO will not, at large, will not be afraid. So it's great that they're learning a very simple truth that little specters are learning in their spectre school. Whoever is peeing himself from fear, they sink. And they decided not to drown, not to sink. Again, if to consider that this weapon might be threatened to on one of the NATO territories like Warsaw or any other NATO country or city, then the response will be nuclear. So we'll see where this Caribbean Crisis II goes to now, but it's definitely already unfolding. When Macron is talking about sending French troops, that's definitely increasing the stakes of this war. Now, if French troops are for real coming to Ukraine, because Putin in his speech also was talking about American troops, but any troops from NATO will become a legal target for Russia, according to Putin. So NATO troops, other countries' troops, NATO is building a coalition. Some countries are joining them, even if they will not be shooting and destroying Russian equipment or Russian missiles that are hitting Odessa. But then, on the other hand, what else would they be doing there? Otherwise, the
pure fact of them being on the territory of Ukraine is already transferring the stage from partnership to allies. This is a drastic change of situation and elevating this war to a new level. This is exactly what Biden administration did not want to happen. They were resisting it by any means necessary, and they were trying to preserve this war from spilling outside of Ukraine. And apparently now, if French troops get on the territory of Ukraine, Russia will start considering them as targets. And well, I should say that France has a lot of colonies where NATO doesn't cover their territory. Right? NATO only goes to the Tropic of Cancer, and anything outside of it is definitely for French to protect. So France has other territories to protect, and they're ready to fight for their interests, especially after Russian motions in Africa, where they attacked their interests severely, the uranium mines. So they found an asymmetric answer to Russian actions there. And they found an asymmetrical answer in Ukraine, and vive la France. I'm glad France is awakening. The war is going into a new phase. Where this phase will lead us, we don't know yet, but I can say that it will be likely a poker game. Will be testing nerves of both sides, and the stakes will be going up, and there will likely be a lot of last warnings, and perhaps the battle actions between the forces of NATO and forces of Russian Federation will likely ensue. And I want to say NATO is ready for that scenario, which is great. It's curious to see how far will Russia go. But I can say that we are in a state of the second Cuban Missile Crisis. All right, but it also means that Putin takes upon personal responsibility. In his interview to Kisilov internally, he says that Macron is now upset that we slapped him in Africa. So he actually formulates the reasons for France. Right, so he takes responsibility that him, as Russia, representing Russian interests, is slapping Macron and France. So he's acknowledging their actions. This was not acknowledged for a while. For a while, they were keeping it on the carpet, right? Indeed, they were. Now they're acknowledging it and keeping their head high and rather proud of it. But you know, for every attack, there is a counterattack. And our Ukrainian intel special services are now attacking those who slapped France over in Africa. So there are a lot of asymmetric answers here and there. All right, so in this war, there are interesting observations one can make. That when you say that Russia doesn't have major successes in this war, how Putin presented it in his interview to Kisilov. He said that countries of NATO wanted to win or prevail over Russia, but they failed because Russia managed to keep the front line. And that's how he packages it, that Russia holding the front line in Ukraine is a victory for them. Well, yeah, the thing is they are presenting as if they're fighting with NATO, but NATO hasn't even come to war yet. Now that NATO is joining the war, we'll see how much are they actually capable to fight with NATO. But I think the wish is finally becoming the reality. So they've been wishing to fight with NATO for a while, but I'm thinking now they'll have a chance to see what happens if. And I'm far from being too optimistic, but I'm cautious, but we definitely will see who can do what. But if French troops are indeed coming here for real, it was a serious channel. I'm thinking it probably is serious. But just on the level of supplies and increased logistics and increased support for Ukraine, this will be a different phase. So it's a third year of big war and things should be changing. I want to say that, in my opinion, as it stands today, and I've seen that with my own eyes, that NATO A is ready for war and ready for nuclear blackmail. And Europe is separately ready for that, even without the United States, and that deserves a special underlining. And France is really pulling the blanket onto itself very rapidly. So they're taking that banner, and they are very ready for conventional warfare as well. And also there are statements by Polish general who said that if we had 40,000 defending Poland before, now we have 300,000. And 300,000 is a very serious group. Russia has in Ukraine only 600,000. Even if this 300,000 will be just physically present on the border. So the war is changing. Strategically is not changing in favor of Russia. We'll see what answers will they find. But strategic turn right now is in our favor. If that was prepared, and if Budanov knew about that, and I suspect he might have known, then his prognostication that everybody laughed at before actually could have material support behind them. And President Zelensky also has a serious material basis to make certain statements. So these statements, these decisions are not being taken spontaneously. Usually there is some discussion happening before it. And right now, I guess we'll see the fight of potentials, the fight of nerves. We'll see who blinks first. So it's going literally right now, and it's a great thing for us. It's a relief for France, and it's a good lesson for Putin that any blackmail and any escalation, for any attack, there is always a counterattack. There is always a revenge coming for what you've done to others. And as I said, we'll put it in the title, Second Caribbean Crisis is unfolding. Okay, let's look at a larger framework, what he was doing and how did he support that in his interview. He said that on the border with Finland, they will have troops. That means that they'll be mobilizing people, right? It requires more mobilization in Russia. Second, he confirms the framework that he increases pressure on the countries of European Union, the countries that have recently joined NATO, on Finland and Sweden. He mentions these countries. He is saying that we had wonderful relations. Why the F are they joining this Western club? We don't understand. But he is sending his regards and nods in this direction. So you're saying that he will probably present that nuclear ultimatum to NATO and EU. And at the same time, you're saying that it's a full frontal attack that's starting. Putin, by the way, is saying that this is not a full frontal assault. Not yet. But if you're saying that, if in this framework they are on a collision course, then he has to use nukes in some way to show the seriousness of his intentions. What do you think? Perhaps on his side, and he's trying to present it as if it's not a full frontal attack or a collision course with Europe. He's trying to cover it a little bit. Well, but we are at war. You cannot be saying that you'll be making moves and the enemy will be just waiting for you to make one. Your enemy, your opponents will be making moves as well. And France, I think, is gripping the initiative now. And they likely will be sending Russia into the Boyd's maneuver that they'll have to try to catch up, but we'll see how much can they. At the end, the most decisive wins. So if France is, as a nuclear country, is ready to place their troops in Ukraine in line of harm and danger, that they likely will be shot at there and be dying there, but they will be fighting with Russians there. So this is a step. Now, if Putin is ready to continue his nuclear blackmail and try to scare out Europe and France from the conflict in Ukraine, they'll try to actively play to separate Europe from the United States. But President Biden will be at least in his current position for about 8 to 9 months, so that's a big question if Putin will succeed in breaking apart NATO and US. But rapid actions by NATO and other countries like France might push Russia and the wing in Russia, political wing that is against continuing this war, to change the current Russian position. Because one war is when you're fighting with a weaker opponent. Another war is when you're blackmailing the whole Europe with your nukes, and then Europe comes out and says, okay, we'll use it against you then. That's a different situation, different scenario. And now we're looking at this probability building up when nuclear rhetoric will be countered with nuclear rhetoric. And on the material level, to try to make the first move to hit something with a nuke, one can speak about for a long time, but it's much more difficult to do. And Putin, whatever people are saying about him, absolutely does not want the world to burn in nuclear ash. He is a man of a different type, and I described him many times. He's a kind of right-leaning liberal, and he is standing for his sovereignty and cultural and political sovereignty for his territory. One can compare his position with some Republican stances. And he has serious support in the global south, of course, but nobody will allow him to threaten the world with nuclear blackmail. Even Trump, that people often attack. So we can say here, ironclad, that the war indeed is switching to a new level. On the ideological and political level, now we'll see how the material will unfold, but I think that'll just follow soon. And when your enemy is ready for your blackmail, then it's not so easy to blackmail. You can actually get slapped and be countered. And the fact that the West is still much stronger than Russia economy. A simple fact, Russian oil refineries started to feel really sad after 100 Ukrainian drones hit them in a frame of a week. What will happen if 11,000 Tomahawks will hit them in the first volley? So, despite of my previous conversations that the West has issues with infantry, we're seeing that they are trying to solve it too. And they do have issues with industrial complex, but now they are actually actively switching to the increasing the capability and productivity. It remains to be seen how long it will take them to rev it up, but at least I would say their capability will be not worse than what Russian machinery can do. And then many things will depend, will chime in. Position of China, position of Korea, position of Iran. They will not be standing outside doing nothing. So there is a huge geopolitical game being played now, where a positive moment is that the West is ready, it's awoken, and it's ready to resist with force. And your humble servant, together with you, Nikolai, was doing everything we could during the last half a year and even before that. So I don't know degree of our work contributed to that, but I'm glad that we did. It was not in vain. All right, about negotiations, Alexei, a strange part. Why strange? Because Putin, talking about these negotiations with Kiselyov, he used several euphemisms and strange proverbs about who is expecting to come to these negotiations with him. And he said that it would be easier for him to find common language who has peed himself and who is drunk and who has sniffing tobacco or some other substance on his nose. Yeah, I think he's poking at Zelensky, implying that Zelensky is a drug abuser and he is using cocaine regularly. We went through that in the election campaign before. It's, yeah, fantastic motion picture stories, but it's Putin's play. In some meaning, a military option was a good option for him. Even last week it was good for him until Macron's initiative. And that play for him was to either win by nuclear blackmail, certain concessions in regards to Ukraine territory, or any peace negotiations, because any peace negotiations would indicate the win of business as usual party on the West, and that would imply partial removal of sanctions and increasing pressure on Ukraine that still resists and doesn't want to pacify with Putin. And now things are changing. Why the war is good in this regard, and quotes good, that everything changes so rapidly. One initiative and the situation is very different. So Macron comes out, and I think it's a very logical and serious position of the West, because it enforces settling Putin down to peaceful negotiations, but from the position of force, because blackmail is not really a good option now. And that means that military option for Putin is weakening now as a scenario for his win of his goals in Ukraine, and peaceful scenario is growing, but it is also a transformed peaceful scenario, because it's not a scenario of the weak West when there's more pressure on Ukraine, but a scenario of the strong West when it's a compromise in force. And it's a different agreement. So Putin is in a very difficult position after this. I think they'll try to exercise some cruel revenge on France, one way or another, but we'll see what happens. As I said, history is an interesting thing. Strategically, Putin seems to be winning for a while. He is either by blackmail or military or negotiation capabilities, he is about to achieve victory. And then Macron rises up and says, no, it will not be so. And now everything in that scenario that Putin liked so much is broken, and he needs to reconsider a lot of things. And we're at the branch of history where it's either a peaceful compromise in force or a nuclear threat, which will be countered by a threat. So it's a good situation for Ukraine, I think. I'm very optimistic. All right, let's unpack the story. There was a meeting by Zelensky and Erdogan in Turkey, and that could be a preparation of negotiation platform, right? We cannot exclude that. And I think Erdogan made a statement that he is preparing. So, in your view, what is the red line of the compromise in force in the new scenario? Let's imagine that capacities of both sides, Ukraine and Russia, are generally okay or both equal, right? Either both rather strong or both rather weak. Well, that's the politics of the West, to provide parity. The moment heavy aerial bombs became a serious factor, they started talking about long-range atoms. So they're trying to keep parity with this. All right, so if Zelensky goes into these negotiations, we know the moods inside Ukraine, they are also a factor, but regardless, what positions should be, in your view, the acceptable compromise positions? What logic should Ukraine follow? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, there is a delay with my internet. I thought you ended and it caught up later. I don't like interrupting people. Sorry, Nikolai. But look, the basis would probably be Istanbul agreements that were prepared before that. They were prepared for a while, and there was a lot of effort invested, and it doesn't make sense to start everything anew when you already have gone down this path pretty far. The main principle would be the neutral status of Ukraine. That will be a key negotiation point, which will be traded for many things. And Putin was talking about reality on the ground, but if there are NATO troops on this ground, let's say French, then reality on the ground is different, and he will have to consider new reality on the ground. And even if France doesn't send their actual troops, but just increases more weapons supplies, and perhaps we get longer range ATACMS and better aerial support, then perhaps Ukraine can join EU but not NATO, then it will be a valid negotiation about what we are agreeing to. And one needs to understand better Russian potential, like academic Lipsitz is saying that their economy is about to break, or would they be able to continue for another 5 or 10 years and continue threatening Europe? And I'm thinking the main negotiation point would probably be not March of 22nd, but the February. So absolute liberation of captured territories, annexed territories by Russia in Kherson and Lugansk and Donetsk regions. So that's one of the options. The other option is to freeze the front on the current line. For us, it will be a weaker position for us and combined West, because the aggressor basically gets the reward in this case, and it will be about the degree of compensation. If, for example, it will be exchanged for economic instruments, for example, 5% of Russian sales of gas and oil into the budget of Ukraine, perhaps for the right to move for all people who want to leave annexed territories, for money to help people who will move back to return to Ukraine. And it should be a long program, not just one time, right? It should be like a 10 or 20-year program. Or perhaps a real referendum about these territories, not with the pressure of Russian arms behind the voting booths, but with European observers and the real elections. So that's a different story. Then we'll have to exchange the neutral status and the front line for economic compensations. And that will depend upon the degree of sternness of the position of the West and our capability to provide, to support that militarily if needed. And our position is pretty stern. This is what Putin is criticizing. Everything else depends upon the degree of support. We have our will to stand. Our will without support of the West was turning into just dumb stubbornness, but our will to stand with support of the West becomes a strategic factor, a positive strategic factor. So if the West is seriously going to support us the way they seem to, then our stubbornness turns into a very good strategic advantage. And those who said we need to stand till the last actually may applaud themselves and say that that was a good decision. On the other hand, who suggested to not stand to the end, right, or surrender? Don't think anybody did. Well, any position is rather complex in this regard. Do you think our side is ready to start the actual negotiations? Nikolai, depends upon the support of the West. Strategically, not much has changed. We have not become an independent country that can fulfill its own military needs. We still depend upon the West in its totality. And if we succeeded with the West due to our diplomacy, that's fantastic. If the West decided to support us, then it's just nice, it's good to receive, but it's on the West to have made this decision, not on us. So it depends also about the pain points of the West. If they're ready to resist to nuclear blackmail and even put their troops on the territory of Ukraine, that's one scenario. If they're not ready, but just ready to supply us more, then it's a second scenario. If they're not ready to supply and not ready to put their troops on our territory, that's the third, weaker scenario. We're still not independent. We have not solved a lot of tasks, and one of the main tasks we're still yet to solve is to grow our military productivity, our military potential to be independent, to provide 40, 50, 60% of our munitions to our troops. And we need to be capable to grow our economy and strengthen it even under pressure. And that's the task for the next stage, I think, for Ukraine. I was talking about that 2 years ago, but at least with that delay, right? So a lot of unknown factors. The main factor, key factor, is what the West is seriously ready for. If France brings troops that are shooting down Russian missiles, that's one scenario. Another scenario when they just bring them on our territory, but they do not actively participate. And then, the weaker one when they don't. And then with military support, with munitions or not. But support is actually happening. Europe was scared enough by Trump and by statements by Putin. They're already increasing their potential. So from just supporting it, they're trying to grow it. And it's already a good starting position right now. As for the future, we'll see, because everything changes too rapidly, and position of France is changing in a good way, rather rapidly. Well, position of France started with Macron, if you remember, saying that we should prevent Russia from being humiliated, right? Yeah, he made some interesting statements at the beginning, probably correct statements, because bringing Russia down would just set the landmine for a rematch later. That's like Wilson did signing the Peace of Versailles. He made all the 5 belligerents, all 4 of them, were cleansed and left not guilty, and he put all the blame on Germany. And that's what birthed the Second World War, because Germany wanted a rematch. We don't want that. We wanted to indicate that we do not fret looking at blackmail, but any attempt to attack us and to destroy our economy and take our territory, it needs to be paid back with money and other concessions. And we understand that we acknowledge the strength of Russia. But as I also said, that right now, negotiations between Ukraine and Russia directly are senseless, because there are bigger questions at stake. It's not just a conflict between 2 countries. It's a bigger framework, global juxtaposition of global South versus global West. Or if you want to dig deeper, it's a juxtaposition of the globalist left liberal trend to right traditionalist trend. And these negotiations cannot be just negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. This would be wrong. The conversation between 2 countries can lead to that bigger agreement, but they would not be able to solve the problem in its entirety. And that's where the interests of all parties need to be considered, including the interests of that Russia and, of course, the global South, that hopefully will preclude additional dozen or 2 dozens of years of wars around the world. I'm rather skeptical about this framework. I don't think they are on the menu yet, but if the next Caribbean crisis indeed leads to these negotiations, I would support it, because it's better 5 years of negotiations than 10 years of war. And everything depends upon the strength of the West, and I hope they do understand, and we'll do our darndest to make sure they understand that they need to understand that. And as I said, compromise with force is a very different situation than a compromise in weakness. We were facing the weakness option last week, and this historical takeoff that happened in the last few days had changed everything. We, by the way, did not mention it, but on the press conference, one of the press conferences of Zelensky, he was asked about a personal meeting between him and Putin. And I think that information was sounded for the first time as an answer to the journalist of Ukraine Truth, Pravda. And it was brought up in a format that, hey, what if, 5 negotiations are better than 10 years of war? But Zelensky remarked that we should not be doing that negotiations because they are mindless and don't lead to anything productive. Do you think it was the right statement by Zelensky? Well, it's always, hindsight 2020. We can look back on much better negotiations like Istanbul negotiations and agreements, but they were not signed for other reasons. Emotional trauma of Bucha and successful push of Russian troops in the north away from the annexed territories. And understandably, that's why we did not sign it, because at that moment everything indicated against doing it. And we just didn't make our strategic decisions like he did. We were asleep for 2 years. We had to face the defeat of our counteroffensive, and to understand that we need more support in order to prevail. We needed Russia to start blackmailing the West in order for the West to wake up. Back then, nothing of that was happening. There was just a promise of full military support by the West. There were several successful operations, Kharkov, Chernigov, Sumy, and we destroyed the Russian plans. So at that time, it did seem like we can probably continue pushing them. So hindsight is always good, of course. And one can probably ask this question to the School of Analytics in different countries. But this is a very specific conversation, a different conversation. Too bad that we were not so smart back then, right? That's basically what it is. On the level of the government politics, of course, we can criticize a lot of things. We're fighting with Russia for so many years. We still do not have an institute that would professionally be researching that issue. That's the price that we should be paying in terms of analysts. But this is a remote conversation that has only indirect influence on this matter. We don't have a serious analytical school, and government, in absence of it, will be taking short-sighted decisions. But since we don't have it now, then decisions probably still remain unjustifiable, but very well explainable. And as for situation now, I am a skeptic. I don't believe into real big negotiations yet. Perhaps if we get to the real nuclear stalemate, then these negotiations will happen. And we talked about a lot of good trends today, but we can cool down a bit our tone, even if we do not get any French troops on our territory. Let's take weakly optimistic scenario. There will be no French troops, there will be no NATO troops. Putin will be still ensuing with nuclear blackmail, but Europe has awoken, even if they're not participating actively in the war. This is definitely a factor, even without United States, and this objectively is already happening. This is not on the level of prognostication, this is what's going on. And second, Europe will be talking from a different position as a result of it. And they will be capable to provide more aid to Ukraine, and we see that even the minimum of support allows us to hold the front line. It gives us additional opportunity to build strategic defense fortifications and provides opportunity to create asymmetric answers. Work on the Russian oil refinery, Black Sea Fleet, Russian Volunteer Corps, and Legion Freedom of Russia actions across the border on the Russian territory. and other parts of the world. And Putin doesn't have too much opportunity to maneuver. And nuclear blackmail is about the only thing he can use right now. He cannot rapidly grow the numbers of troops on the backdrop of his so-called elections. He cannot change the vector of his economy to go for the better. So super attempts on the Russian side are not likely, even if they'll try to conscribe everybody. Economy, I don't think it'll break apart. Let's imagine that they continue going and trending. This would not be enough. This is maybe enough to take maybe 2 more Avdiivkas, but not enough to provide a strategic break, even fighting Ukraine alone. So even strategic, rather pessimistic prognostication is not in favor of Putin and pushes them towards the blackmail, towards nuclear blackmail. But there is another good factor for us, that the West at large, Europe and the United States, are not afraid of that blackmail anymore. And if NATO allies are going to be under threat in Europe, the United States will also not be standing. They'll be paying attention and probably acting. So that's why our prediction today is more optimistic, because many things are changing on a strategic level. As we were talking, the changes aggregate slowly, but realize in a rapid fashion, right? 1,000 days and nights. All right, a couple last news for today. We had an event when the First Lady of Ukraine refused the offer by the United States to participate on the joint session of Congress, where it was suggested that she would be sitting next to Jill Biden, First Lady of the United States, and next to Yulia Navalnaya. Do you think this was a good move, bad move? What do you think about that? In light that Yulia Navalnaya is not saying anything about Russian Volunteer Corps and Legion that are fighting against Putin regime with arms, I think this was a very valid motion by Yelena Zelenskaya. I do not consider Russian opposition seriously, despite of all the explanations and other things they say is more important, until they post their position in regards to Legion, Freedom of Russia, and Russian Volunteer Corps. I told them that in Brussels, in Tallinn, on many individual meetings. Until Navalnaya has an official position or other significant opposition politician of Russia will not have a strong position to support the fighters against Putin regime, then it's not serious. Once they have it, then we can talk. Until she positions herself as a supporter of those Russians who are risking their lives with arms in their hands fighting against Putin's regime, until Navalny comes out in support of them, there is nothing to talk about. So I think Yelena Zelenskaya was absolutely correct. The news of the last week, Valery Zaluzhny needs to be sent as an ambassador to London. A complex news. What do you think about it? Let me put it delicately. That position has its advantages and its disadvantages. So I would wish upon Valery to realize the advantages of it and to hide the disadvantages of it. Very diplomatic answer. Let's try one more. It's related to Roman Pope. So when Zelensky was meeting Erdogan in Turkey, there was an interview in Ukraine. They surfaced an interview of about a month ago. They shifted the priorities and the accents in this interview, and it was commented by a rather famous Ukrainian politician, Chepenoga, said that, hey, Ukrainians, you know that's a month old, right? We know it's about nothing, right? We know that it's Russian PSYOP, we know. Then what do you have? Oh, just to make a statement. Okay, so do you think that interview, do you have the same opinion about this interview? I'll tell you even more, Nikolai. A head of the Old Believers and their channel turned to me and suggested me to have an interview. Leonid Sevastyanov, he has a small channel of 20,000 subscribers about the initiatives of Pope. They wanted to use me as the tuning fork because they know that the news will be spreading rather far and wide if I talk about that, regardless whether it's good or bad. It usually is being picked up by different media. And for me, it was clear that it was an organized push. I don't know whoever threw that into the Ukrainian sphere. They wanted to emphasize it through me. So what I want to send to our brothers in quotes or without quotes, if historically speaking, but dear friends, those brothers who turned to me, there's definitely brothers in quotes. So first of all, you failed because professional has a heightened sense of danger, and that approach, that whole thing has signs of organized operation. And I want to appeal to our Ukrainians, saying that if you think the West does not read our media, does not read your accusations and your attacks on them, and you think this has no effect on their desire to support Ukraine in that critical moment, you're very mistaken. Your clips and accusations of the drafting committee in Ukraine are being heard. Even Musk criticized that. Speakers of Republican Party criticized that. So whatever you're talking about, I would suggest you guys be more accurate. Now, about the Pope and his position. His position causes a lot of Catholics a pause. I'm not talking even about traditionalists who refuse to take the Second Vatican congregation, but even the others, they're really surprised by these statements. And there are statements by cardinals, not just regular believers. And Pope, I think, will have to carry a degree of responsibility even in the logic of a Catholic Church. But the point here is that I think I'll have housekeeping enter the room and the person will become the hero of our media. Yes. Okay, thank you there. No, the person did not become a hero of our stream. All right, so what I wanted to say is that he is the head of Catholic Church. 1.5 billion people, huge influence around the world, and mostly on the global south. In the same United States, there are 65 million Catholics, more than Protestants. I would strongly suggest, if not for Ukrainian users online, but to our diplomats and more advanced people with higher positions, to think twice before attacking him publicly. Of course, he's leading certain processes in Vatican. There are different processes happening there on the Catholic world, on the level of the papal position. I can say a lot about that, but I think Catholics talked about that at large themselves. They already denounced these words of Pope. But I would suggest for us to pick the right words. A smart one would be increasing the number of friends while engaged in a war to death, or at least do not increase the number of enemies. And those who accuse Pope directly, not him personally, but the position, this is not a great strategy. Same thing about Elon Musk and other big figures. Do not breed enemies where you do not have to. Plus, these figures, they have their own logic behind their statements. They defend their own values the way they believe in them. And the highest achievement of diplomacy and the highest achievement of war was always considered to be a capability to turn your enemy into a friend. Not to destroy it, but to turn it into a friend. This is the highest achievement of human civilization, to make an enemy a friend. And the lowest achievement would be to turn your friend into an enemy. And we Ukrainians are rather large experts in the second, in the latter. We turn either friends into enemies or neutrals into enemies. So position of Pope is one story, and it was brought as a psyop in our media, but attacking the Holy Throne or the leading businessman, if we're talking about Musk, and the others, this is a bad story. We should not be doing that. You can criticize their position, you can pick the right arguments, you can argue about that, but without personal attacks. And I understand there are a lot of people who will not be able to do that on the personal level, but if you're on any official position or have an influence, refrain from that, please. Musk had done a lot with his Starlinks for us, and Pope as well had played a lot of things. in our history. So try to separate position of Pope Francis and the Catholic throne in Rome. We should not be attacking the Catholics at large and the Catholic throne. That's unacceptable. The last one I wanted to hear your opinion on. William Burns, director of CIA, at the Intel Committee of Senate on Monday, March 11th, said that with help of United States, Ukraine should be able to take the offensive initiative on this conflict by 2025. This supports what we discussed today, but it goes against previous statements. I remember you're talking about autumn as a critical time. Let's perhaps suppose... No, Nikolai, I was saying that we don't know the full potential. For example, we don't know the exact number of arms already accumulated in Ukraine, even after aid from the West was interrupted recently. But looking at us, suddenly having got artillery shells for the front, apparently we have found 800,000 of those somewhere with aid of the West. I wonder where were they? But of course, Burns, director of CIA, knows everything, way more than I do, and I have to use my analytical capabilities to understand what and where he has the actual data. So if he calculates that it'll be till 2025, then it's good, because all these trends will probably be realized even further. By that time, Europe potential will be much larger than it is now. So reservedly pessimistic approach will probably change to reservedly optimistic. And Burns' statement also implies that there will be aid coming from United States. He implies that if Russia has potential to 2025 and we will be supporting Ukraine, he implies that they will be supporting Ukraine by that time. So the positive news is that the West has awoken and that Europe is considering facing Russia even without United States and facing the nuclear blackmail. So in this regard, we are currently in the scenario of a Caribbean Missile Crisis. It's early stages of it, but we're getting there. And Europe is ready to start performing and negotiating from the position of power. This is great. Until this turn, we did not know if that would happen. We were fighting for Europe to awaken, and now it did. So the prognosis will change, likely change, and we'll be clarifying the predictions week after week as more data will become available, as the situation will unfold. But even without bringing of French troops or any other troops into Ukraine, this is a serious turning milestone. Europe has woken up, is rising its head, and it's ready to confront Putin. All right. And the main thing I wanted to clarify, without American aid, these prognostications still remain optimistic or not? Even with American aid, Nikolai, it is reservedly optimistic. It's not exactly optimistic. Russia is still very strong. Too many factors. The war still has a long track to go. I'm not even talking about global factors, because if France joins Ukraine, China might start aiding Russia more. So there are many variables that can change. We got a definite advantage by Europe awakening. This is a colossal factor of probably a heavenly level. But it doesn't mean that China would not do anything, or Iran would not start contributing more. So this is just one of the factors in this war, and the crisis will continue, will ensue. Just the fact that Europe is ready to face the blackmail and is ready to communicate from the position of power, this is a super factor, even if half of Chinese army comes here today. Because if Chinese army came here without any support from Europe, that would have been much worse, right? So that's the difference. We are deep inside the crisis. It will be unfolding. We are likely going to face nuclear blackmail. China and many other factors may still play. That's other cards that the Global South has to play. And this condition, overall, the conflict is between the Global South and Global West. And Ukraine and Russia is just a localized version of it. And the Global South has a lot of resources. In some capacity, it might be even stronger than the West. But at least it's a good development right now. So we'll see. I hope there are good changes happening. I hope there'll be some good changes on the ground. There is still a good asymmetry happening. Oil industry in Russia is going down and supposedly will continue to go down further. So that's good. We continue to support our armed forces
right? Yeah, Nikolai, we are supporting not only military, we are supporting all forces defending our country, not just the army, the bodyguards, the special services, right? And in every of our streams, we continue the fundraising for our troops on the front. We verify, we make sure that the accounts and the requests are real, and we try to get the fundraising going for them so they can get what they need, and they usually send us video reports saying their thanks. 28th Special Brigade is collecting for UAVs, 250,000 hryvnias. 28th is fighting on one of the critical directions in Donbass, and every hryvnia, every cent we pay, is aid to that group to make sure we can support them in a difficult time. 250 is not too much. We have done that before, usually within 24 hours, so let's try to close it. The link is under that video. Thank you, Alexei, for joining us on the stream. Thank you to Nikolai. Do not forget to subscribe to Alexei's channel, to Alpha Media channel, and to the Privateer station. If you are listening or watching that in English, we are very thankful for your support. Everybody, have a good night. Till later.